Oh. Sorry, I
Calling.
take back that.
What were you going to say, Chris?
Nothing at all.
All right.
Nothing at all.
Calling Chris Anderson in the jolly old England town of London.
Jolly old England town of London. Yes, this is Chris in the jolly old
Jolly
England
old
town.
London. Doesn't Dickens have a thing, the jolliest Christmas in the jolly old... Anyway,
And
welcome,
calling
Chris.
Thank you, Rick. And where are you today? Other than on a cloud somewhere.
Cloud 9.
There we go,
Cloud 9.
baby.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here. Listen, Chris and I may travel the globe, but we still manage to be here Sundays to have a cocktail and talk about history with you. So welcome, everybody, to History Happy Hour. And Chris, we should shout out, as we always do at the top, our Patreon supporters.
Yes, absolutely. Look at that.
And these are our top
we
shelf supporters. We still have that blank space.
We have that blank space, guys.
Somebody should upgrade to be a top shelf supporter, or somebody should join us. And we have many other patrons who are also with us, and we do appreciate your support and your support. And you can support us at patreon.com/historyhappyhour. And Chris, I have another picture here. This very exciting picture that you sent me.
I am, yes.
And so I'm excited for reasons we'll get into, but you're excited. Tell us what this picture represents and why you have this big grin on your face.
Yes, that is me sitting in the cockpit of N3200, which is a Mark I Spitfire that was shot down over Dunkirk and is now the most original Spitfire still flying at Duxford. And I was at Duxford for a Spitfire conference, and I got to sit in it, and that is just like a boyhood dream come true, and it was flippin' awesome. And hopefully we are making arrangements so that guests on our Battle of Britain tour will have the same opportunity. So it was a very cool moment. So
wow. So check out Chris's Battle of Britain tour. Have they posted that up yet on the Stephen Ambrose website? So people can check that out. And we'll talk about another tour, the Normandy Masterclass. There are many tours.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
We're getting into season, but we will talk about another tour at the end of the broadcast. And who's here? Who do we have joining us today, Chris?
We have Ken and Lizzie Borden, of course. I have to give a shout out to Lizzie. And Ross. Ted Moon is taking time away from football to watch History Happy Hour.
He's somewhere in New Jersey. He's like undercover. I know. Skip is in snowy Delaware.
And Nancy is in lovely Houston.
And we want to welcome everybody. And if you're a first-time viewer here and you're watching us on Facebook, please like. And if you're watching us on the HHH YouTube page, not talking well today, please subscribe. Hey, Chris, have we killed enough time to get to the actual open of the show?
If you insist, yes.
I think otherwise we're going to run out of time. The show's going to end.
The bar is open.
It is, Chris. And before we get to our guest today to talk about the Black Medal of Honor recipients in World War II, I have some exciting Ghost Army news to report. So you
more exciting than a Spitfire?
You want to? I don't know that I can make that claim, but be glad. Grab your glass and be ready. The Ghost Army, salute now. The Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act that we've been talking about for a while won final passage from the House of Representatives this week and will now go to the president for his signature, which is just exceptionally cool news. And I want to share with you that debate in the House took place on Wednesday. I won't play the whole debate. You're lucky. But here's a couple of excerpts.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a group of veterans who have gone unrecognized for far too long. In World War II, top secret units known as the Ghost Army used combat deception to literally fool the Nazis. Their mission was to divert enemy forces away from American combat units so that our troops face less resistance. This required creativity and a special kind of courage.
The stories of the creativity and innovation displayed by the members of the Ghost Army during World War II read like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster script. The only thing missing is a Hollywood ending where the brave members of the Ghost Army are finally recognized for their life-saving contributions to defeating the Axis powers during World War II. This bill ensures official recognition for this heroic group of citizen soldiers and their unique contributions to the war effort. I thank Mr. Markey and Ms. Custer, the lead sponsor of the House version of this bill, for ensuring that the stories of these men of the Ghost Army receive the recognition they deserve.
And Chris, a lot of people have been sending me messages of congratulations, and I'm delighted to receive them. But the real shout out here isn't to me or to the other people who lobbied for this. It's to these soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and the 3133rd Signal Company Special. And I've come to know some of them, many more that I didn't know. There are only 9 left now out of 1,100. And they carried out battlefield deceptions right under the nose of the Germans. They made a difference. They deserve to be remembered, and that's why this is so special to me. So we've said Ghost Army a number of times, but I think we can just make one toast to that and raise a glass.
You forgot something, though.
Okay.
You always told me that when this finally did happen, you were going to dress up as a Bill. So when does that happen?
Okay, wow. Well, we'll think about that and get back to you. I thought I was going to play the cartoon. Bill.
You have to dress up as a Bill.
All right. We'll contemplate that. And by the way, if you're watching this show for the first time and you were like, Ghost Army, what's that? Check out ghostarmy.org.
Yes, please do.
Okay, on to a very different topic today, also about delayed recognition. In 1945, the U.S. Congress recommended awarding Medal of Honor to 432 recipients. But in spite of the fact that more than 1 million African Americans served in World War II, not a single black soldier made that list. And it took more than 50 years for that wrong to be righted, and 7 black soldiers from World War II were eventually awarded the Medal of Honor. So today we're going to learn about some of their heroism and why recognition took so long, and explore if there's more recognition due to black veterans of World War II. And our guest today is Rob Child, who's the author of the new book, Immortal Valor, The Black Medal of Honor Winners of World War II. Rob has spent 20 plus years in television and film as an Emmy, not an enemy nominated, he's an Emmy nominated producer, director. I gotta calm down, Chris. I think I was just still so
no
excited.
More caffeine for you.
Among his films is The Wereth 11, the story of black GIs massacred by the SS. And so, Rob, we want to welcome you to History Happy Hour. Can you hear us?
Thank you.
Yes, hey. Rob can hear us. We've had some technical issues with Rob, and he may freeze up there, but at the moment he can hear us and we can hear him. So,
thanks for having me on, Rick and Chris. Congratulations on the gold medal. But I can't hear you. I can't hear your audio.
Aha. So we're
Can
having...
you hear me, Robert?
Whoa. No. Well, so we're still having technical problems. So Rob's going to have to come back in one more time. Rob can't hear me. So this is fun, everybody. Now you get to witness what happens on History Happy Hour when we have technical problems. So I would say, Rob, quit out one more time and come back in. So I'm going to actually remove him and say we're going to have to have Rob come back and join us again, and hopefully we will get the audio situation there straightened out. So that's exciting. Chris, I just was saying before the show started that Chris has been asking me for the last 91 weeks, if we have something craps out with a guest, do we have a plan B?
Yes.
And you didn't ask me today. And now,
because you berated me for always asking me that.
Now look what has happened. We had a guest, but then we had some technical problems. So
Rick, tell me about the Ghost Army.
I'll tell you this, Chris. So we're waiting for so the president has 10 days to sign a bill. Did you know that? The president has 10 days to sign a bill that's passed both houses of Congress, but the 10-day clock doesn't start until the bill is presented to the president. and that bill has not yet been presented to the president. So we don't know when that 10-day clock will start. And then once he signs the bill, it's probably going to be 2 years before there's an actual medal, because that's the process with the U.S. Mint working on that. So it's quite an involved effort to make that all happen.
Can't you just do it yourself?
I think it doesn't have the same impact if I do it myself. I think that we're not going to go there. So, as we're waiting for Rob, one of the things that I was going to ask him how he came to this story, but the way I met Rob Child, actually, which is about 10 years ago, is because of a film he did called The Wereth 11, which is a story that some of you may know about. Wereth is W-E-R-E-T-H, and it's the story of a squad, I guess, of African-American soldiers in World War II, captured and then essentially executed by the SS during the Battle of the Bulge. And so Rob made that movie. I think it was in 2011.
Yeah, well, I was just there with my group in Bastogne. It's one of those kind of very often overlooked parts of the Battle of the Bulge. Everybody focuses, probably rightly, on the Malmedy Massacre, but as I pointed out to everybody on the trip, there were several massacres of American soldiers that took place during the Ardennes offensive, and Malmedy was just one of them. The Wereth 11 was members of an African-American artillery unit that had been basically swept along, and they were massacred.
Did you get to visit that spot, or?
Yeah, I go on all my tours, and Rob's film comes up quite a bit when we.
Oh, okay, Rob, we're talking about your film, The Wereth 11, and can you hear us this time?
Yes, I can.
All right, hey.
Now we're just
fingers crossed.
Just stay right there.
Keep smiling, so that if you freeze, you freeze with a smile on. That's important, and then we'll still hear you. Rob, we were just talking about your amazing film, the Wereth 11, and Chris was talking about how he has visited that spot with groups in Bastogne. And I want to know, you did that film, you've done some other stuff, but now you've done this book, Immortal Valor, about the Black Medal of Honor recipients. So obviously you're very interested in the story of African-American soldiers, little-known stories about African-American soldiers in World War II. What brought you to that topic?
Well, you're right. I mean, I did the Wereth 11 about 10 years ago, and that subsequently became a book. And when I did that film, I discovered there were so many untold stories of black soldiers in World War II that it was like a treasure trove. So I knew I wanted to do a follow-up story to the Wereth 11, and it seemed like the natural decision to focus on the Medal of Honor recipients, because their stories are so heroic. I knew that I could, really get into it and enjoy the writing of their stories.
So, Rob, just to kind of bring everybody sort of up to speed, obviously African Americans are Americans, and they have a long history of service to their country in times of war, and they've had their own additional battles to fight. They had fought with great distinction during the First World War, but after the First World War, could you just kind of describe the state of kind of what African Americans were facing in the U.S. military, how they were viewed, what their place was in our armed forces when we go to war?
Sure, in World War II. I was asked this question on another interview, and after World War I, there was an Army War College report that came out in 1925 that basically was very derogatory towards African Americans, blacks in general, saying that they would run in a battle, they wouldn't fight, that they weren't as intelligent as white soldiers. It was a devastating report from the Army War College that was, obviously untrue. It was very racist, and that colored the commanders in World War II and how they approached black soldiers. So it was because of that one report that blacks were relegated to service roles at the beginning of the war.
But that did change a little bit, right? Because that's sort of one of the interesting things reading the book, and we'll get into some of the individual stories a bit later on, is that if we think of African Americans as largely serving in the Red Ball Express or in ComZ or in other modes of support, there are a bunch of guys who eventually, not maybe in the early part of the war, end up in artillery and infantry units, tank units. What happens there?
Right. There's a couple stories there. The first African Americans in combat were the 333rd, which is the Field Artillery Battalion, which is actually what the Wehrith 11 story revolves around. And they entered the war in 1943. And but the sea change happened in late 1944 when, after the Battle of the Bulge, the attrition was so high with white rifle companies that Eisenhower made the decision to open up the infantry to black soldiers because they couldn't fill enough positions in these rifle companies because they didn't have the personnel. So I don't want to say begrudgingly, but they did open up the ranks, the frontline ranks to black soldiers who were working in service roles, and they invited the black soldiers to participate in combat.
Hey, good news, guys! Yeah. You have the great honor of joining us at the Point of the Spear, which is also, of course, the name of your podcast, Rob.
Yes, exactly. And to the black soldiers' credit, they overwhelmed that request. There, close to 5,000 applied for combat training and combat roles, and the command structure was shocked because they didn't have enough areas to put them. So they limited the number to about 2,500, and about a little over 2,200 actually ended up qualifying in the training and entered combat in early 1945.
But then you also have, right, there's an entire division, right, that's largely African American. Am I?
Yeah, the 92nd.
The 92nd Division under General Ned Almond, one of my great non-heroes of who himself is pretty much kind of a racist. And then you also have some tank and anti-tank and artillery units, right, as well, right?
Yeah, the 614th is one of the units that Medal of Honor recipient Charles Thomas served in, and that unit trained at Fort Hood. It was called Camp Hood back then. And the interesting thing about the tank destroyer battalions in World War II is that was developed during the war in late 42, and one of the guidelines or rules that the War Department created for this new unit was, as opposed to other units, it had to have black officers, which wasn't the norm or the rule in rifle companies. So Charles Thomas, that's why he commanded a company in the war, because that was the first time that they trained black officers to command companies in the tank destroyer units. But in the rifle companies, in early 1945, the way that they structured it is Eisenhower laid out that the black soldiers would not be replacing white soldiers who were wounded or killed. They created a fifth platoon that was commanded by white officers. So it was a completely separate. They call it the fifth platoon, and there ended up being about 52 of these platoons attached in various divisions.
Wow.
So I just want to back up just a bit and get to back to what we were talking about. But we have this perception of the good war and everybody's united and America goes to war. and this rush of patriotism. But the members of the black community see this as an opportunity to say, hey, something's not right here, and they want to get their sons into the fight, and they launched what's called the WWII campaign. Could you kind of explain what that is?
Right. Yeah, that was it came about by an op-ed, basically. A soldier, James G. Thompson, wrote to the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper in late January 1942, basically what was on the minds of most black Americans who were entering the war, that why should he serve for his country if he was only half American? Would this prove his citizenship? Would he be able to return to the States as a full American? And he wrote that letter to the newspaper. They printed it, and the newspaper developed the campaign, the WWII campaign, which was victory abroad and victory at home, which meant equality at home. If black soldiers did their part, and they did, they would earn their equality, they thought, when they returned home from the war. And that was the motivation and the catalyst for why they fought so hard, because they felt like when they returned from the war after doing their part, they would enjoy full equality as any American should. Unfortunately, that didn't occur.
Yeah, that's one of the tragedies. I thought it was interesting, and again, we'll get to the individual stories, but there's 7 people who are the heart of your book, who were eventually awarded the Medal of Honor. 4 of them, I think, I went through and I hope I'm correct here. 4 of them enlisted, 3 were drafted. And I thought it was interesting that given racism, given segregation, given the way that black Americans are being treated during this time, it's amazing to me. I don't know what the percentages are. It's amazing to me that anybody would enlist, but obviously fair numbers of people must have done so.
Yeah, they did. I don't know the exact numbers of how many black soldiers enlisted, but you're absolutely right. It was a different world in the early 40s, and I got the sense that a lot of black Americans felt like they wanted to do their part along with everyone else.
Sure.
And that's why they, enlisted.
So Rob, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so let's turn to some of these people. I mean, there are 7 individual stories, all of which are incredible, and I don't want to we don't have time for all the stories. We don't have time to give too much away.
And then if we told every story,
they wouldn't buy the book.
We can't get people to buy the book.
Which we want them to do.
So you want to buy the book, but we're going to touch on a few of the stories.
So I'm gonna jump the gun and beat Rick here and say that one of the people that really I found his story compelling was Edward Carter.
Oh, absolutely.
And so let's just kind of use him as an example. Could you tell us a little bit? There you
this
go.
Guy right here.
That right.
He's on the cover. And the thing that's really compelling about him, and I'm not going to give too much away, is but by the time he joins the U.S. Army, he's already been in a few other armies.
Rick, you have to let him the author tell the story. That's how the show works.
I'm setting him up, Chris. That's how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll receive that.
Thank you.
Yeah, everyone seems drawn to his story, and I was as well, obviously. This is the soldier, of course, Edward Carter. And I didn't want him to overshadow the other 6, and I was very cognizant of that. But his story does stand out. I'll go back to his beginning. His father was a preacher. His mother was from India. She was Anglo-Indian, and he lived as a young boy. He lived in Calcutta, then he lived in Shanghai. He grew up in Shanghai in the international settlement, and his father was very strict, very domineering, and Edward wanted to, spread his wings and get out from underneath his father's, thumb, And it just so happens that in 1936, the Japanese invaded Shanghai. Actually, they bombed Shanghai and the international settlement where the Carters lived. And Eddie took that as his opportunity to sort of run away from the family and on his own. And what he did was he was in school at the Shanghai Military Academy. So he ran away and actually joined the Chinese 19th Army.
And how old was he, Rob?
He was 15.
Yeah. But, okay.
Yeah. And he joined the Chinese 19th Army, and they said, oh, and he spoke Cantonese. So he didn't have a trouble with the language. He spoke several languages. And so they put him, the Chinese rifle in his hands and put him on the trenches. And he fought in some of the early battles that were written up in the New York Times. And obviously in this, the chaos of the Japanese invasion, his father was very worried about him. And he had heard a rumor that he had ran away to the military. And he showed up at the headquarters one day of Carter's commander and asked for his son. And he said, and his commander said, oh yes, he's here. He's doing a great job for us. As a matter of fact, we're going to promote him to lieutenant. And he's going to fight with Chiang Kai-shek. And his father said, no, you're not, because he's underage. He's only 15. And they were shocked. So they said, okay. So his father pulled him out of the army, put him back into school, and he continued with his education at 15. But he wanted to get away again a few years later when Mussolini attacked Abyssinia, when the Italians invaded North Africa. He went to the U.S. Embassy in Shanghai, the consulate, and asked if he could go fight in Africa. And they said to him, America's not in that war. We can't allow you to go fight because we don't have any soldiers in that war. So they knew that they had to do something for him. He was determined. So they said, well, we can get you into the Merchant Marines. And he accepted that. So he joined the Merchant Marines. I think he was 18 or 19 at that time. So he served in the Merchant Marines for several years, then returned to Los Angeles after serving there I guess it was like 1939, no, it was earlier than that, because he got back to Los Angeles and there wasn't any work for during the Great Depression for Black Americans. There was no work. So he had been reading stories of the Spanish Civil War and been inspired. Life magazine with all the pictorial spreads of the heroic fighting in Spain. And he decided to, through his merchant marine contacts, get on the ship and go over to Spain.
Because he's got experience.
Right.
He's probably more experienced than a lot of the volunteers that are showing up.
He was, yeah.
Yeah. So he joined he got to Spain, and he showed them he had the combat experience, and he joined the Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Wow.
And fought with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which was his commander actually had no combat experience. He was a former professor from Stanford. And so Eddie was the only one with any real combat experience. And most of his fellow soldiers were just idealists who wanted to fight for freedom against Franco. And it was just a mess. But he served heroically in the Spanish Civil War. Unfortunately, that came back to haunt him years later.
But then, but do go on, because
should I go on? Okay.
Well, I think we I don't think we. I mean, can we? We don't want to, as we say, we don't want to give away all seven. But I mean, he goes on. Of course, the war starts. And he ends up he enlists, I think, doesn't he, in the U.S. Army?
Yeah, he returns to the States.
This guy didn't get the message from the sergeants who say, never volunteer for anything. This sort of the veteran approach. He's volunteering for for
He's
everything.
volunteering for every war that's possible that's going. He was a natural-born soldier. He returned to the States, again tried to get work as a civilian. Actually met his wife Mildred after the Spanish Civil War, and decided to enlist in 1942 in the U.S. Army, and he went to Fort Benning, and he was assigned to a quartermaster company, and went over to Europe, and his letters home were basically, I'm tired of pushing a mop. He had proved in marksmanship training in Georgia, what a good shot he was, and his commanders wrote him up in the camp newspaper, but he was pushing a mop, and he was very frustrated, and he applied to get into combat, and he was turned down several times, until finally, in late 1944, the letter I mentioned from Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, actually allowed him to enter the training in January 1945 with the rest of the black candidates for the rifle companies. And he went through training, and he joined the 12th Armored Division, and rose in the ranks, actually.
Didn't he have to give up to join? He was a sergeant, right? And didn't he have to?
He was a sergeant, and they told him if you joined, you'd be demoted to private.
Back to private, and then he rose up again.
Yep.
And I'm just interrupting you, Rob, because so he is. It's a very compelling story. And Chris, do we want to go to the end and tell the whole story, or do we want to save that for people? And
there's a lot to it.
There's lots to it. I mean, I I think it's important to talk about some of the things that went on to get these guys to their positions. I don't, obviously they're Medal of Honor recipients, so we know they did something brave, and we can talk a little bit about that. But I want more to talk about what these people are going through to be in a position to perform these roles. So what was the reaction, when it begins, and then during combat, and then after combat, to these integrated these 5th platoon units? I mean, because obviously, all of a sudden, a platoon of African American soldiers arriving in a white rifle company could have caused a stir at first. And did combat change people's opinions, or?
Yes. The white soldiers, in my research, were a little bit wary of these black soldiers because of what I referenced earlier, the War College Report in 1925. And then, these platoons of black soldiers show up, and the white soldiers don't know what to make of it. I'll reference a story from Willie James Jr., who was a scout in a rifle company, in there he is right there, in the Rhine River, and they crossed the Rhine, and his platoon was held back. They weren't put into combat immediately until there was a situation where there were a lot of SS soldiers dug in. They were already in Germany, and the Americans had to clear this hill, this forest of these SS hardened young soldiers. And they said, his commander said, well, let's see what this 5th platoon can do. And there was a reporter there who witnessed it, a female reporter embedded, and basically the guys got very excited, and they were well disciplined, but they charged this hill, and they cleared this hill, this 5th platoon, of all these hardened young SS soldiers. There were more than 60 of them, and they took 40 prisoners, and they brought them back. So they more than impressed the white commanders that they could do the job, given the opportunity.
Right. But it doesn't change attitudes long term, right? I mean, I guess one of the things I'm curious about is it takes until 1948, and it seems like the stories of these 5th platoons is quickly dropped. So, do we know why, or kind of what happened? Why they ended the program?
You mean in Korea, or?
Well, prior. So, in 44, 45, they create these black platoons with white rifle companies. Mm-hmm. They perform very, very well. But then at the end of the war, Eisenhower says, "Okay, you go back to your trucking company, and we're just not going to talk about this anymore."
Yeah.
And then it takes until 48. So,
yeah, that was
why do you think that?
Yeah, that was a slap in the face. That after the war, they were sent back to their service companies. I think it was the glacial speed of the military infrastructure, basically, that delayed that integration that Truman put into effect. And because things did change in the Korean War for Medal of Honor recipients, Black Medal of Honor recipients. There were Black Medal of Honor recipients in the Korean War, and their medals were awarded very timely, actually still during the conflict. So things got back on track after World War II. But these, there remained for 4 decades no Black Medal of Honor recipients from World War II. And
what changed that, Rob? Yeah, what changed that? So what happens is that basically nobody's even there's no documentation of any paperwork. There might be one exception to this, but in most cases that anybody was even written up or recommended for the Medal of Honor. So how does it come about that 45 years after the war, some soldiers are awarded the Medal of Honor?
Well, it was basically because by the late 80s, early 90s, no Black soldiers had been awarded the Medal of Honor from World War I either. So there was a great push by an individual that pushed for, I believe it was Freddie Stowers initially, to receive a Medal of Honor for World War I. And eventually a second Black American did receive a Medal of Honor for World War I in 2015 that was awarded by Barack Obama. But in the late 80s, early 90s, when it was recognized that no Black soldiers from World War I had received it, a senator from New York said, well, this is strange. Why aren't there any Medal of Honor recipients from World War II either? So there was a push on to recommend a study be undertaken, commissioned by the War Department, which it was in the early 90s, 1993, at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, to examine why no Black soldiers had been awarded medals from the Medal of Honor from World War II. So it took the absence of World War I Medal of Honor recipients to start that ball rolling. Otherwise, it wouldn't. I don't know if it would have occurred.
So Rob, I think you have these 7 individuals. They have DSCs or lower awards. They don't receive the recognition they deserve. And I remember when these medals were finally awarded, there was some debate and discussion about, well, why did it take so long? But maybe we're just giving these medals out as a sop almost. That maybe they didn't deserve it. Could you just pick one of your 7 and tell us what they did, the award they got, and hopefully that would make it clear why these are Medal of Honor worthy actions?
Sure. Yeah. I'll preface this with the study took 3 years. It wasn't just a throwaway award.
Right.
They interviewed witnesses and commanders and investigated these men thoroughly, and their criteria was they were elevating Black soldiers who received the second highest award for valor, the Distinguished Service Cross, to Medal of Honor. And there was one exception, and that was Reuben Rivers, who received the Silver Star, but that's another story. But yeah, I'll select John Fox, which is the last story in the book. And Fox was a first lieutenant. He wanted to make the Army his career, and he attended Wilberforce University in Ohio and ROTC, and commanded a cannon company in the 366, which was based in Massachusetts. And he was stationed in Italy under the 92nd Division. And over Christmas 1944, he was assigned to a town called Soma Colonia, which was at the top of a mountain range, not the very top, but very high up, in the I believe it's called the Appian Mountains in Italy. And his role over Christmas 1944 was forward observer. And he selected a tower in the middle of the town to scout, see if there were any, problems coming, or they anticipated an attack. The infrastructure, American military anticipated an attack, and one came, but the size of the attack was more substantial than they expected. Some very skilled German and Austrian units, which were trained in mountain warfare, surrounded his town. And there were about only 75 soldiers black soldiers from the 366 in that town, and about 20 Italian partisans. Well, the Germans started a bombardment of the town at 4:30 the day after Christmas, 4:30 in the morning, and they attacked the town from two directions, and they outnumbered the soldiers in the town 3-1. And the Americans were melting away. It was a horrific battle, and in the midst, and Fox was calling in artillery strikes surrounding the town to try to stem the tide of the Germans coming into the town from two directions. The other direction was a mountain cliff, so you couldn't come from there. But it got to a point where he couldn't call in any more artillery strikes because the Germans were already in the town, and it devolved into hand-to-hand fighting. So in desperation, he called back to fire control, and he said, "Look, I need you to fire on my position. These are my coordinates." So they said, "We're not going to fire on. You want us to fire on your position?" And he said, "Yes, I want you to fire on my position. There are more of them than there are of us. Fire on my position." So his request had to go up the chain, and it was approved by the general who was commanding that section. And it came back, and they said, "Yes, we'll fire on your position." And it was a salvo that they fired, but he as a forward observer of artillery had to adjust the artillery strike. They fired the first salvo, which is called firing for effect. Well, and it wasn't close enough to his position, so he had to call in new coordinates, an adjustment. He called in an adjustment to have them fire again on his position, and it came closer. And he said, "Yeah, that's pretty close. Make a final adjustment and then fire everything you got." And they did, and they fired on his position, and he was killed in that artillery salvo. And what he instructed fire control to do was, after they fired the salvo, to fire a smoke round, so that any Americans left in the town could escape under the haze of the smoke, and under the and not many Americans were able to leave, and he was a casualty.
But something like 100 German soldiers were killed, I think you said in the book. So he sacrificed himself to deal a really strong blow to that enemy force.
Yeah. That number of 100 is sometimes in dispute. That came from German records, and that's been the number that's bounced around, but it's not totally verified. But because it was in the records.
Yeah, and I think it's the fact that he calls in artillery fire on himself and breaks up this attack, whether it's 100 or 75.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, but that, because his commander you mentioned earlier, Ned Almond, was unfortunately a avowed racist. He wasn't recognized for that action with any award until it was investigated by Harnden Hargrove in the 70s and 80s. And Hargrove pushed for Fox to receive the Distinguished Service Cross. And that wasn't awarded to Fox until 1982. And his wife was on hand to accept that. So even his Distinguished Service Cross was delayed until the 80s. I mean, that's the atmosphere it was.
Well, one of the things that's also interesting is that in many of these cases, and an example might be in the case of Sergeant Reuben Rivers, who's also an amazing story, a tanker. He was killed in the action for which he was eventually awarded the Medal of Honor. But in his case, there was another officer, David J. Williams, a white captain, who advocated for him very strongly at the time and afterwards. And that's the case in a few other of these, right? So part of this is a terrible story of racism, of certain people, or structural racism in the U.S. Army. But part of it's also a story of that these guys had advocates. They said, well, wait a minute, we've got to recognize this. It's really important. And I mean, in the case of Reuben Rivers, David Williams advocated for him for 40 years and lived to see him win the Medal of Honor, earn the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, he definitely did. He was dogged. There was the study I mentioned at Shaw University. The researchers discovered, Dr. Gilbrand discovered that there was an unspoken rule that no black American soldiers would be recommended for the Medal of Honor. So that's why they were, even though the commanders wanted to recommend them for the Medal of Honor, they were recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. But David Williams, Captain Williams, was the exception. He felt like Reuben Rivers deserved the Medal of Honor, and he wasn't going to put in for second place. So he wrote up a report that his commander requested because he said that Reuben deserved it. And Williams worked for 50 years to see his unit recognized, first with a Presidential Unit Citation, I believe in the late 70s, 78, which the 761st Tank Battalion received. But he also worked with the researchers on the study at Shaw, and he was an advocate with them for Reuben, who was the only recipient who didn't receive a Distinguished Service Cross because Captain Williams refused to put in for the second highest honor. So he was just dogged about it, and he was able to attend the ceremony in Washington, 1997, and he gave an interview to the Baltimore Sun that I mentioned in my book, that he felt like now the deed was done. God could take him now because Reuben received his Medal of Honor. That's how intense he was about it. God could take him now because the deed was done.
Wow.
So, Robert, as somebody who's worked in this field in the history of African Americans in the Army, with particularly in World War II. As you were researching this and delving into the lives of these, 7 incredible people, is there anything that really surprised you or that you found that you didn't expect to find?
Well, I think it was the intensity of the prejudice surprised me, because from a modern perspective, obviously there's still racism in this country and in the world. It hasn't gone away. But when you look back to this time in history, it was pervasive, it was structural, it was everywhere. I mean, recruits at Fort Benning in Georgia, when they went into the town, they weren't allowed to look white civilians in the eye. They had to look down. That was the norm. They couldn't look because it was considered uppity if they looked a white civilian in the eye. So some of the things like that really surprised me. When you, in context, that shows you how far we've come. Obviously, we have, ways to go, but it's hard to imagine a life, for a Black American at that time. It was, they were living as half an American. That's why, that letter James G. Thompson wrote to the Pittsburgh newspaper was so telling, because it was the truth.
I was, we talked to Charles Person last week, who was one of the original Freedom Riders, and I just think it is very hard for, certainly for me, to try to understand what life was like in the Army when it was Jim Crow segregated, in the South when it was Jim Crow segregated, frankly, in some northern cities during that time where it was also, just terrible conditions that we just almost can't even grasp. But Rob, what I want to ask you about is so 7 people were awarded the Medal of Honor. Is this enough to right the wrong? Are there other people who should be recognized? I mean, it seems to me that the Army found 9 Black soldiers who'd been awarded Distinguished Service Crosses. They only decided that 6 of those 9, plus Reuben Rivers, deserved the Medal of Honor. And so I'd say, what about the other 3? And what about the other services? I mean, are there any ongoing efforts here to recognize other people along similar lines?
Yeah, there are. And I mentioned that in the afterword of my book, that there's 2 active petitions right now to award 2 more Black soldiers from World War II the Medal of Honor. Of course, it's not enough, and I hope that they continue to investigate the service of Black soldiers in World War II. But these 2 Black soldiers were like these other 7, performed above and beyond the call of duty. One is Waverly Woodson, who served as a medic on D-Day and worked for 30 hours straight. And it's been documented that he took care of 200 plus soldiers during his stint during D-Day. And he collapsed after 30 hours of attending to the wounds of over 200 servicemen. Another soldier served in the Pacific. He was a messmate, 3rd class. His name was Dory Miller. And Dory Miller served on the West Virginia during the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Sure.
And he, when the Japanese planes came in, a lot of the gunners were killed, and he jumped on a 50 caliber machine gun. He had never operated one in his life. And he shot down, it's estimated, 3 or 4 Japanese Zeros. And he was recognized with the Navy Cross. But what's interesting about his story is the commander of his ship, the captain of the ship, whose name I don't remember, was carried off early in the attack on a stretcher, and he received the Medal of Honor. So Dory, who shot down 3 to 4 enemy planes, is certainly worthy of the Medal of Honor as well.
So Robert, you talk about this a little bit at the end of the book, and I'd like to kind of get into this a bit. What's the legacy of this? It's one thing to give these men the recognition they deserve for their families and their supporters, but what are the services doing to say these people were important and this is what they did and this is why you should remember them?
Well, the services have taken the step for 2 of these Medal of Honor recipients by commissioning ships in their name. George Watson, a ship was commissioned in his honor, and I believe it's a transport ship. And Edward Carter, an ammunition ship, was commissioned in his honor. This image is from the naming ceremony in 2001. So that was above and beyond the call. And I worked extensively with his daughter-in-law, Aline Carter, and she was very, very proud of this, and actually got the opportunity to commission this ship, the Edward Carter, in 2001. And she jokes about that because she, at a lot of ship commissionings, the christenings, the champagne bottle doesn't break, and that happened to her as well. She tried everything, but it just wouldn't break against the hull of the Carter. But that's just an example of trying to right a wrong. And I didn't get much into the modern military and where things stand, because I kept it in historical context.
Sure.
So
I know there was a picture in your book of like a Medal of Honor hall or something like that.
There is a traveling exhibition that opens up, that's been on the road. It's from the National World War II Museum. It opens up at the Orange County Fairgrounds in February, on February 16th. And it features 5 of the 7 medals. So people in California or that surrounding area can go and see 5 of the Medal of Honors that were awarded to these men. And there's information on on who they are. So that's a traveling exhibit that's going back to the World War II Museum in the fall. Okay. But there's ongoing efforts, and hopefully my book will play a small part in opening up people's minds to awarding more and recognizing these men more.
Absolutely.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to just say the name of your book again is Immortal Valor, the Black Medal of Honor Winners of World War II. And it is so important. I think both Chris and I feel that remembering is very important. And you have really helped remember and honor these people. It's been almost 30 years since they were 20 to 30 years since they were honored with the Medal of Honor. So you kind of brought that back to the fore, brought some of those stories forward. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Good luck with it.
Glad your sound came back. It was so much better with sound.
It's so much better when he talks, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Chris, before we leave, we have a couple of pieces of business. Don't leave, audience. Stay with us for a moment. Don't leave Chris either. I promise not to talk about you-know-what again. But I do want to make a mention that Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours has a master class coming up in Normandy that both you and I are going to be with, which I think starts right at it's like the first week of April.
But more importantly, who else is going to be with us?
Well, tell us about the opportunity that's here for people, and I'll ring the bell so that you can do that. Okay.
No, we've kind of hinted to this before, but in preparation to get back on the road again, and to really delve into the Normandy campaign in a lot more detail than we usually get a chance to do, we are going to be in Normandy with 5 of the Stephen Ambrose historians: Rick, myself, Hugh McDonald Buchanan, Eric Flint, and Matt Brogy, and a small group. We're going to keep this very, very small, of interested folks, and we're going to kind of delve into Normandy in really great detail, pull out our maps, our compasses, our first-person accounts, get muddy boots, get out on the ground, and really kind of delve into some of the nitty-gritty of what happened on June 6th and the weeks afterwards. So I know Rick and I are both really looking forward.
Right, so if you are interested in coming along on this, you can email one of us, and if you don't have either of our emails, rick@historyhappyhour.net is one of them. Just send us an email, reach out to us, or you can contact the Stephen Ambrose office. But this is going to be a really cool. I'm really hoping to fill up my notebook with interesting information, coordinates, map coordinates, stories, etc.
We're going to be able, things like we're going to spend a whole day on Omaha Beach just studying that in detail, and it should be really good. And then hopefully, if we can work out the technical stuff, we'll try to have like a History Happy Hour live session or something. Maybe.
Yes, we are definitely going to try to do something with all those historians there, and possibly again around D-Day. We might do a live from Normandy event. So those are kind of cool things. Next week, Chris, we are going to have an encore episode, but you and I haven't talked about it yet, so I don't know which one it's going to be.
So stay tuned. We'll see.
So stay tuned. Very exciting. You'll have to wait for this news to come out this week. I know you're all hanging on it. And I want to just mention that in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking to Kevin Hemel, our fellow Stephen Ambrose guide, who is heavily into George Patton. And if you know Kevin, you know that's true. He's just written Patton's War and American Generals Combat Leadership, Volume 1. Yeah. So we're going to have Kevin on to talk about General George Patton, and I'm sure the sparks will fly. Or at least it'll be interesting, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you, everybody, for joining us this week on History Happy Hour.
Stay safe, everyone. Thanks.